Yeah, hi there. Another video in the Bearhawk saga. Making tools for doing some particular tasks on the airplane is always kind of a fun thing to do, and a friend of mine that helps me on the airplane, a guy by the name of Jim Harden, he's an airplane mechanic. He challenged me to get a slip roll, and I'll show you why. Over here in the front section here, there's some cowling bits that need to be rolled, and you can see that it's quite wide. It's just about 36 inches wide, and a little spoiler alert, this is what we ended up with. Got two cowl doors, but how do you make those? That's the problem. You need a slip roll. I only need a slip roll for two cowl doors, but he needs one for doing his airplane business. So we decided to go out and take a look and see what we could do for maybe making one. Went online and saw a video of a New Zealand farmer that made a slip roll, a smaller one, albeit I think like 12 inches or something like that, for making wheel rims for his little carriages that he builds. Very basic, and using fencing parts, basically fence joints. Very creative, very low buck, and not very precise, but he saw the video, my friend saw the video, and said that's what we need to do, just need to scale it up. So here's what we came up with on paper. Just really quick, just brainstormed a little bit, and said okay, this is what we want, build it. Said okay, so this is what I came up with, and that's what we used to make the cowling bits. What I'll do, since I already have this machine already completed and I didn't do any video while I was making the machine, I did take some pictures, and I'll go ahead and put those into this video and do an explanation about the build. But let me just talk about a couple things about the slip roller before I get into the build process. You can see that it's set on a piece of 10-inch channel, and that's what he wanted. He wanted a little bit of portability. It's fairly heavy, and you can see those are the fencing bits that we used for aligning the tubes. And also you can see in here with the jack screw and everything like that how that top roller gets raised and lowered. And on the back you have the chain sprocket that I've got for all this going on here to drive the two wheels. Those are the bottom ones. Just as a word of advice for those, whenever you're building this, you need to try to get these two tubes aligned as best you can. I do realize that there's play in these tubes. It's not a tight fit. It's good for our application because we're just doing thin sheet metal. But regardless, when these two tubes are inserted into these fence brackets here, they need to be spot on with the other side. So this adjustment here, where these two bolts go through, is critical. Make sure that when you put it in here and these pipes lay down in their natural spot within these two brackets on the front and the back, that you make sure to line that up as best you can, because otherwise this won't roll a straight line, it'll roll a cone. Granted, like I said, it's got some play to it, but you still want to take whatever uncertainty out of it. What I use for driving it, you can see I've got what was at one point in time a 3/4 to 1/2 inch socket adapter that I loaned out, and somebody had broken it. I saved that part just for the heck of it, in case I need to use it, and here it is. I also saved a old jack handle that I had, made a little square adapter, and that's what I use for turning this thing. You can see it rolls along with it because of the chain on the back side. And how we use to adjust the rollers, the top roller, is we use little socket wrenches. Have little 1/4 inch sockets, some old ones that I welded to the top of these towers. and we'd count the rotations. Like this would be 1 rotation, 2 rotation, 3 rotations, and then we'd go, the other person would be back here, go 1, 2, 3, and then we'd roll whatever we needed to roll. If we needed a differential roll like what we have here for the cowling bits, we'd go deeper on one side than the other. And the other part of this is this little chain sprocket gizzy here. I'll post in the link below, or in the description below I should say, the New Zealand video and also all the parts that I used for making this. These towers I fabricated out of 1/4 inch plate, got a hole saw, made those. And one other thing about this, how do you set it to 0? Because really there's no adjustment here. You can't see any adjustment. So the idea being is that you should be able to slip a little piece of metal under here and have it drag this top roller. So this is our little gauge. Just got a piece of sheet metal. You can see it won't slide under there, so we know that that top roll is down a little bit too far. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and back it off. Let's see, we'll go 2 turns. It drags a little bit too much. We'll do 1 more. Yeah, maybe just a tad more. Just want it to where it slides on top of the bottom 2 rollers and just underneath the top roller without making any movement on the top roller. And that's what I got. Nope, that side's not good, so we'll go ahead and go the other way with it. There we go. Raise it up a little bit. See where we are. Oops. Helps if you go the right way, Paul. I'm almost there. See, now this one's a little bit too loose. I can wiggle it. So we'll go back down just a tad. And there you go. Just a slight drag fit. So that's it. Now it's set to neutral. And you can take the ratchet handles and put them where you want them. And that way you've got an indicator about where you are. So like I said, I'll go ahead and I'll post the build video using just some pictures, and then I'll come back for a conclusion. Okay, here's my first screenshot, or my picture of some of the parts that I got. I've got 6 tees and 6 collars that I got from easyfit.com. They've got, they're normally used for 2-inch diameter pipe, or correction, tubing. And I'm using 1.5-inch diameter pipe, which is schedule 80, and pipe is measured on inside diameter, tubing is measured on outside, so the pipe, schedule 80 pipe, is 1.9 inches in outer diameter. So that should slide right in there with a little bit of slop, actually quite a bit of slop, but that's okay. The 2 sprockets above I got from Surplus Center, and I got some 25 pitch chain to go along with that, and also a half link and also a full master link when I join the chains together. This is an initial layout that I had for the fittings. You can see though I did change the collar location on the middle tube. I went ahead and put the collar from the outside to the inside. It just seemed to fit better at the time, so that's when I went ahead and changed the design just a little bit. This is the sprocket that I got from Surplus Center that's listed in the parts. It's got a 1.5-inch diameter hub, and the sprockets are larger than 2-inch diameter. So that's what I'm actually looking for, something that'll slide within the 1.5-inch diameter inner diameter of the pipe that I'm using, and this fits perfectly. All I have to do is just tack weld the outside and I'm done. The one thing I need to do is make sure before I tack weld it is that the face of the tubing is square, and that way the sprocket won't wobble as it's being turned. Okay, here's where I did my initial fit up. One thing I did not mention in my intro video for materials, you're going to need something that's about 2 inches in diameter. I had a friend of mine that had a
section of pipe that was super thick. I don't know how thick it was, maybe 1/2 inch wall thickness. And anyway, the inside diameter was less than 2 inches, the outside diameter was more than 2 inches, so it was perfect. We needed to turn that down. Got a 12-inch section, and we turned it down to 2 inches. At least a friend of mine had a lathe that turned it down to 2 inches. And we used that about 3.5 inch segment of that 12-inch pipe for each joining of the T-fittings. Now the inside of those T-fittings are a little bit rough. You'll probably need some sandpaper or some a burr or something just to smooth it out. Just make sure it's a nice snug fit. This is where it gets kind of important. You need to make sure that those rollers are equally spaced, not only side to side but up and down. So those the joining tubes for those T-fittings are kind of critical. Make sure they're nice and snug. Also, you're going to use about 1.25 inch chunk of that same tubing for making the jack screws, or the fittings that go inside the T-fittings for the jack screws, and it'll be explained here in a later part of this video. Initially what I did is when I went to my local steel company, in addition to getting the Schedule 80 pipe, I went ahead and had them shear off 4 pieces of 1/4 inch plate, 10 inches by 10 inches. I wasn't quite sure what the height is going to be. The width was going to be determined by the C-channel. So you can see here that I'm drilling my 2-inch holes using a Makita bimetal saw, and I used my measurements, and I figured, well, I actually didn't need to use the entire 10 inches. Actually, the top of the middle 2-inch hole that I have is right at 5 5/8 inch from the base. So that's something you can hopefully use just to make sure that it clears the top rollers and you have enough space to remove the roller if you want, in case you try to make something that's smaller diameter than you can get off normally. Yeah, here you can see that I have the holes drilled in the plate. Obviously the center holes aren't connected. That's where the middle tube is going to rise up and down. So I'm going to need to cut a slot between those 2 holes, and because I don't have a mill or I don't have a plasma cut or anything, it's just going to be a lot of work. So let's get to it. So after using a various amount of tools to cut that little piece out between those 2 holes, stuck it in the vise, and I trued it up with just using files and just made it all nice and smooth and made it look real pretty. But all in all, make sure that it's accurate. So you can see I've got the middle part between the 2 middle holes cleaned up. I got it cut out and cleaned up rather. And also, if you look, it's 7.5 inches tall, 10 inches wide. After I went ahead and cleaned them up, I took them back to my local metal place and had them shear the 2.5 inches off the top. And I used those for spacers later on that you'll be able to see here in just a second. Kind of an unfortunate look to that, the old twig and berries there, but that's just the way it turned out. It doesn't look like that on final assembly. So that 2-inch piece of metal or pipe or whatever you have that I talked about earlier, this is where it comes together. It holds those 2 T-fittings apart the same way and hopefully in alignment. And I match drilled them one side to the other, but I made sure that they were accurate. That 2-inch diameter piece of steel is in between those 2 T's, and that's why I'm using the drill press to make sure that the holes that go through the fitting, I'm using the set screw holes on the top, and I'm just drilling through the fitting at the bottom and also through the 2-inch diameter tubes. Okay, so the next slides I've got here are basically just taking my end plates and putting them in with the T-fittings there on one end and the other bolted in place, just to make sure I've got the proper fitment. I double checked the measurement horizontally between the 2 tubes on the front and the back, Also, I checked to make sure that I had enough clearance within those plates, and they all looked relatively symmetrical. I know, like I said, it's got a lot of play in there from a machinist's perspective, but it should work just fine. I just wanted to make sure it was even and the measurements were the same from front to back. This is where the thought came about to go ahead and bevel the sides of this box that I'm using for the jack screws. I've got the 2.5 inch by 10 inch drops that I got from when I sheared the 10 by 10 plates down to 7.5, and I decided to use those plates as spacers for the top and bottom. And this is where I came up with the idea to kind of bevel the sides to make it look a little more interesting, and where I did the measurements to do so. The next slides you see are of constructing the actual tower. I'm using parts of the drops from the 2.5 inch by 10 inch pieces that were sheared off the 10 by 10 plates. And you can see I just welded them along the top. It helps minimize distortion that way. I did tack on the inside to get them all lined up. You can see here in the second picture where I used magnets to line up the sides. But all in all, you just have to make sure that they're square and they're parallel to each other, and once that's done, then you're done. Once the towers had been welded together, I went ahead and put them on the assembly, checked them for fit, and they all looked really good. So I went ahead and went on to the next step. So this little gizmo kind of makes everything work here. You got to be able to take that middle and move it up and down. And so how do you do that? Well, I figured I can use the 3/4 inch by about 4 1/4 inch long all thread that I had, and I went ahead and drilled a hole and tapped it for a 5/16 inch bolt, and I used one of the drops that I had from the cutting the holes in the plate and used that as a base for that. You can see the next slide I have there, I've got probably about maybe 1.25 inch piece of that 2-inch diameter turned down pipe that I had. Same thing for joining the T-fittings on each end of the roller. Welded the cap to it, and I went ahead and I pinned that bolt using just a roll pin. So that way the thing can turn really nicely. It can move it up and down, and I turned that bolt just to where it had no slop, but it still turned freely. And then when I ground a little flat spot there in the all thread, drilled a hole for the roll pin and drove in the roll pin, and that way that bolt will live happy and won't spin out any time it gets turned. Gonna fast forward a little bit here. The rest of the description was in the original video. And you can see got a lick of paint on it. I like blue and yellow, obviously, so I went ahead and painted that. And I started rolling cowl doors with it. You can see those pictures of the 2024 T3 being rolled in there. And the last image is of the two folks that were helping me out with the project. I had them roll it while I was taking a picture, just so you kind of see what you need to do. It doesn't have to be a two-person operation, but it helps when you're adjusting the middle tube screws up and down to keep count. So anyway, that's about it for this segment.
Okay, so as you can see, the build is relatively simple. No real special tooling, you just need sharp drill bits and a ruler, and that's really about it. But you can end up with products like this. That's one of the cowling doors. I brought it over here next to the roller. Like I said, the guy that wanted this roller built, it's got a 52-inch capacity if you measure from the inside of these collars. And it's perfect for the aviation use. This is 2024 T3 32,000, so it's a heat-treated material, and it's got a lot of spring back. So we don't need to make cones or anything like that using a slip roller. This is good just for making cowling bits, and that's exactly what he wanted, and that's exactly what we ended up being able to get. So I'm really happy with the way it turned out, because we were able to complete the doors for the project move on with the project. Hopefully they're going to stop by again today, and we'll get the doors on the cowling and get all the rest of the bits established. So there it is, simple build. It may suit your needs, it may not. It's not really, I guess, good for doing like 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch plate. That's something a real metal shop might do, but for aviation purposes, doing boot cowls or cowl doors might be just a ticket for you. Anyway, thanks for watching. And again, like I said before in a previous video, Google does advertise, or YouTube does advertise on this channel. I don't get a penny out of it. I don't want them to advertise, but it's part of the deal of getting free videos on YouTube. So until next time, thanks.